Hello again, brothers and sisters. This is Franklin Jones, the author of the book, The Black Matrix. You know, while the while the Black community has been studying our Bibles, believing that it's the true words of God that will protect us, white oppressive forces have instead studied the science of social engineering, how to control and steer large populations using exploiting their monopoly over information. And they've used that gained knowledge to mentally enslave millions of Black people. And when those of us who know the truth try to teach the truth to those who do not, they get angry and tells us to just shut up and keep reading our Bibles. It's how the ignorant tries to keep us all mentally enslaved. But the reality is, Black liberation will only happen when we elevate our minds above a biblical fairy tale and a slave syndrome myth, and learn instead that there are social sciences that are being deployed against us. Social sciences. And while we are at this time, we're focused on police brutality, which in itself is a devastating problem in our communities. There's actually a soft war being deployed against us. Soft war deployed through what's called an ideological subversion program. It's when those in power exploit their control over narratives, and they feed a targeted group lots of disinformation that causes them to think in ways that are against their own self-interest. And most of us are completely clueless of how this works. Right now, if I was to use the F word in return to the homosexual community, this video would be flagged. If I was to use a derogatory term in regards to the Jews, this video again will be flagged and taken down. But I can say nigger all day long with impunity, and there's no problem. Now, why is this? We have to recognize that this is a part of a soft war that's being deployed against Black people. It's a covert ideological subversion program. Our culture is being negatively steered by white oppressive forces as a means of maintaining their white social dominance over Black people. Through this system, they've conditioned millions of us to perceive ourselves through a marginalized and derogatory false identity that aids them in maintaining their social dominance over us. Right now in our culture, our young men are admiring those who get on a national platform and call their entire race niggers. Those who get on a national platform and celebrate the term pimps. You know, a pimp is the most degrading thing a man can do to a woman. He takes a woman out there and put her on the street, make her sell her body and giving him the money. There's nothing more degrading than that. But our culture is celebrating the term pimp. And we normalize it. We're celebrating the pimp industry. Our female rap artists, they've created, there's a vulgar in their dialect. They talk now about men busting inside of them and doing this and riding on top. And we don't understand of how this erodes our culture. Most people think that the media reflects our reality. But the truth is, the media most often shapes our reality. People become those derogatory media depictions of their group that they accept as being themselves, their truth. Because the white oppressors controls our media images and control our narratives, it is they who are telling us how Black people are supposed to act, how Black people are supposed to dress, what's the norm. They are negatively steering our culture through a science known as media social engineering. Those who control the people's media images are able to steer their culture. And this is the covert war that's being deployed against us, and we don't even understand this. And our ignorance of it gives them their greatest strength. Many Black people say that we made the word nigger ours and using it empowers us. And those who believe this are ignorant. They are not only are they ignorant, but they are ignorant of their own ignorance. We did not make the N-word ours. During the 1960s, African Americans, we started calling ourselves brothers and sisters. We started saying black is beautiful, and we started praising Africa as the motherland. Our culture has went from calling ourselves brothers and sisters to calling ourselves niggas and bitches. And we went from revering Africa to many of us now being embarrassed of our connection to Africa. And many of us want to be anything other than an African. This change within our culture is by design. Our culture is being negatively steered through media social engineering, and most of us don't even realize it. And this soft war continues. Studies in social engineering advanced how that certain wars. So while we're focusing on the police brutality, we're not seeing the greater war that is affecting millions of us. Right now, we, Black people, are the face of crime and degradation. We are the face of vulgarity. And this is what's happening through those who control our media, those who control our media images. They've conditioned us to perceive ourselves through a fraudulent, marginalized identity that aids in maintaining white dominance. Until we elevate our minds and recognize the war that's being deployed against us, they're going to continue to use it against us. During the 1960s, there were these social scientists who studied the African American community. Their mission was to, first of all, they wanted to find out what was the cause of the unprecedented unified Black protests, and then develop methods to subdue it, to prevent it from happening. The goal was to study our weaknesses and study our strengths, then to attack our strengths and exploit our weakness. They determined that our greatest strength was Black unity, so they had to erode Black unity. They also determined that we had an elevated self-esteem brought on by the emergence of the Black Pride movement, so they had to lower our collective self-esteem. They also determined that our collective aggressions had reached to a point where now we were rebelling against the white society, so they also had to shift our collective aggressions away from the white society and redirect it against ourselves. They also determined that one of our greatest weaknesses is that we were stripped of our true identity and culture during the enslavement of our ancestors. And they found a way to exploit the fact that we've been stripped of our identity and culture. And those things they learned, they weaponized it against us. Because they determined that our collective self-esteem was an issue that was a core factor of the unprecedented Black protests, they now keep us believing the fraudulent worst about ourselves. Because keeping our morals low, keep us believing the less about ourselves, makes us easier to control. Critically think. Now, we know that virtually all narratives that we receive from the white society are consistently negative. Do you not see how unrealistic that this actually is? To have a group where all the narratives are consistently negative? Or how is it that all narratives that we receive that compares Black to whites favor whites over Blacks? To consistently have narratives so constantly favoring one racial group over the other at the rate that we're experiencing it is not realistic. It's a part of a psychological warfare campaign. White social scientists determined a long time ago that by constantly inundating Black people with narratives that exalts whites and marginalizes us, they can instill a value system into our collective subconscious minds that aids in maintaining white dominance. This is the soft war that's been waged against our minds. We have to understand it in order to liberate ourselves. There can be no progress without proper understanding of our plight and condition. Because if our understandings are flawed, then all remedies that stem from those misunderstandings will also be flawed. This is why white oppressive forces spread so much disinformation into our community, because they don't want us to grasp a proper understanding of our plight and condition. There are social sciences that's been deployed against us. This is why all of our narratives are low. They also determined during the 1960s that although the white society, through their weaponry advantages of guns and cannons, could invade and enslave Africans, they, however, could not maintain a relationship with Africans, gain our loyalty without deploying systems against our minds, because whenever people are oppressed for long durations, their collective aggressions toward the dominant society will continue to grow until acts of retribution becomes inevitable. This is an inherent part of the human condition. The oppressed always eventually rebels. And this is what was happening during the 1960s when we saw the unprecedented unified Black protests. So they recognized that to prevent it, they had to also shift our collective aggressions away from the white society and redirect it against us. This is why they constantly bombard us with black on black crime, black on black crime, black on black crime. Now, the reality is all racial groups are killed primarily or are victims of crime primarily by their own racial group, every race across the board. This is because this is where people cohabitate. This is where people interact. This is where people marry amongst. These are when people cheat amongst. We tend to do this among our own. And this cohabitation is also where crime happens. And it's the same across the board. Most Asians are killed by Asians. Most Latinos are killed by Latinos. Most Caucasians are killed. But we're only hearing about the black on black crime. And we're also being made to believe that ours is the highest. This conditions us to perceive ourselves as our worst enemies, which then redirects our collective aggressions away from the white society and redirects against ourselves. It's a psychological warfare that is being deployed against us. We must understand what's happening. Now, then in addition to constantly have us believing the fraudulent worst about ourselves, keeping our morals low, they also condition us to perceive ourselves as niggers. We did not make the N-word ours. That's a false propaganda narrative created by white propagandists and spread into the Black communities. And those of us who are ignorant, gullible, naive, we accept it and we regurgitate it, never ever researching it. We just said we made it our own word and it empowers us. A Black man who insists that we made the N-word ours and that using it empowers us is in fact ignorant of his own ignorance, completely ignorant. It was white men that socialized us to call ourselves niggers, and they used it through the system known as media social engineering. During the Black exploitation film, they started making all of these movies where Black people were in leading roles. The Black man fighting against the system, and we hadn't seen that before in the movies. So the Black community flocked to those movies because it showed us an image of ourselves in ways we haven't seen before: leading men, heroes, fighting against the system. But at the same time, those men, those actors were hired to call themselves niggers, the women bitches and hoes, jive talk. Black people, while watching the movies, started to accept that what we saw on the screen represented us. And we started calling ourselves niggers and bitches and hoes because we said that's our culture. But we didn't realize that we was watching a characterization of our culture created by white social scientists and propagandists, and we absorbed it and believed that that's who we are. And we started calling ourselves niggers and bitches. You see, when we call ourselves brothers and sisters, we were more unified. Words have power. If you call a man my brother, and you see the cops killing a man you call my brother, this produces something inside you where you're more likely to respond. My brother was just beaten by police. My brother. Now, when you call a woman your sister, you are more protective of her because you keep calling her your sister. If you regard her as a bitch and a hoe, no, your concern for her is diminished. Words have power over our minds. Words, when repeated often enough, shapes our thoughts. Our thoughts, when held long enough, shapes our biology. We become what we call ourselves, okay? This is why men who call themselves thugs are more likely to engage into a fight than to avoid one. It's why women who call themselves bitches often become stubbornly unreasonable. This is a psychological phenomenon that social scientists have thoroughly researched. And our ignorance of it is the white society's greatest power. Now, if you doubt this, I'm going to show you this is a fact about the power over words. During the Vietnam War and the war, World War II against Japan, many American soldiers experienced anxiety in regards to torturing the Japanese soldiers as well as the Vietnamese soldiers. And our social scientists taught this by teaching the soldiers to call these people gooks, chinks, Japs. It allowed them to dehumanize them and it made it easier to mistreat them, to torture them. I myself was a drill sergeant in the military. And when I trained soldiers to kill, I always dehumanized the other group by calling them the enemies. I was trained as I never called them humans, people. They were always called the enemies, the enemies. Words affect how we function, how we treat people. Okay? So by conditioning Black people to call ourselves niggers, it conditions us to perceive ourselves through an inherent marginalized identity that aids the white society in maintaining their social dominance over us. Okay? By conditioning us to call each other niggers, we are more divided. Okay? Within every group, there are the alpha males, and the alpha males are inherently responsible for protecting the female and protecting their communities. But if the alpha male has been conditioned to call his women bitches and hoes, he is less inclined to defend his women. If the alpha male has been conditioned to call his community a bunch of niggers, he is less inclined to fight and defend his community. For example, if you pay attention, whenever a Black man has just assaulted another Black man, committed crime, and he tells you the story of it, he doesn't say, "Man, I beat that brother up. I kicked that brother's ass. I robbed that brother." He said, "Nah, I killed that nigger. I had that nigger crying. I stomped that nigger crazy. Man, you should see that nigger." The word nigger is dehumanizing the other group, and this makes it easier to mistreat. There are social sciences that are being deployed against us, and our ignorance of it is the oppressor's greatest weapon. Our ignorance of it. Black liberation will only happen when Black people elevate their minds above a biblical fairy tale and a slave syndrome myth and start learning of the true social sciences that are being used for maintaining white dominance. Because of this social science, your entire perception of reality is an elaborate white deception. Now, how is this possible? You see, public perceptions are not shaped based upon facts nor reality. Public perceptions are shaped by the narratives that are routinely fed into society. Those who controls these narratives controls the interpretation of reality. Because the white society exclusively controls all societal narratives, they own the interpretation of reality. And they constantly feed false narrative into a society that creates assumptions within the society that aids in maintaining their white dominance and that aids in their subjugation of Black people. People function based upon the narratives. The white society I'll give you an example. Many people are functioning based upon the perception that the largest recipient of welfare in America are African Americans. This is untrue. The largest recipients of welfare are Caucasians. And not just because of their larger group size, proportion with the African American population and the proportion of the Caucasian is still the largest group receiving welfare. They also spread the narrative that Black people are the greatest benefactors of affirmative action. This is untrue. The largest benefactors of affirmative actions are white women. Therefore, white women, by extension, the white family, affirmative action has benefited the white society more. But they spread the narrative that there's always a story of a black man taking a job from a more higher qualified white person due to affirmative action. But affirmative action has benefited Caucasian women the most. We are functioning based upon false narratives. The narratives that are fed into our society is also that many believe that most inventions that revolutionized the world were invented by Caucasians, and that black people are the leeches of society who are benefiting from the genius inventions made by white people. This narrative, this is a false one. But this narrative is the cause of the false feelings of superiority that whites possess and the feelings of self-loathing and inferiority that many black people possess. That's because they are functioning based upon the narratives that are fed into a society. Even though the narratives are untrue, most people, what matters is that people believe that the narratives are true. This is why social scientists says perception is more effective than reality for controlling people, because people function based upon their perceptions rather than what's truly was true. So the white society feeds distorted narratives into our society. The hidden reality is this. Most inventions that revolutionized the world were in fact either invented by a black person or were inspired by an early invention by a black person. Now, when lies have been fed to a nation for many years, the truth sounds ridiculous. And a speaker of the truth sounds like a raving lunatic. This is the reality. But your perception of reality is a falsehood. The white society feeds false narrative to our society that creates assumptions that aid to maintain their social dominance over black people. But the hidden reality is most inventions came from black people. In every major Western city, they always show off their tall skyscrapers. The beauty of white supremacy. Look what we've done. But do you know the landscape of the white society would not look as it does without black people? We wouldn't have skyscrapers if it wasn't for black people. Because a black inventor invented the elevator. A black inventor invented the air conditioning system, the central heating, the fire escape, the fire extinguisher, which is all. If it wasn't for the elevator, the highest building would be no more than 5 stories high, because the average person wouldn't want to walk more than 5 flights up. So those tall skyscrapers that you're seeing, they exist because of black people's inventions. But see, these are the narratives that you know of. The white society conceals these facts by feeding distorted narratives into our society. They distort those. And here is why. According to social science, in order for a dominant group to maintain their position of social dominance, the narratives that are fed into society must exalt the dominant group above the subordinate populations. Okay? People are inherently tribal, and they do not normally accept the long-term dominance of other racial groups over their lives. In order to get humans to accept the long-term dominance of other racial groups over their lives, this requires manipulation of the people. And there are 3 ways to effectively manipulate the human mind: by what we're taught, by what we see, and by what we hear. Because the white society controls the education we're taught, the media images we see, and the societal narratives that we routinely hear, this allows them to indoctrinate false ideologies into our minds that manipulates us to think in ways that serve their interests without them even realizing it. Okay? Like we function based upon what we're taught, what we see, okay? And what we hear. Many people believe that the light bulb that's over my head, we have it thanks to the greatness of a white man. And why? Because this narrative was fed to us. Thank God for Thomas Edison. We have a light bulb. But here are the absolute facts, and I encourage you to research. When Thomas Edison was inventing his light bulb, there was an African-American inventor who was also working on his own light bulb. Thomas Edison rushed to get his light bulb patented first. But however, no companies purchased it. No companies purchased it because it wasn't efficient enough. It didn't last very long. It lit very dimly. So no white companies purchased it. The white companies deemed that it wasn't efficient enough. The light bulb that was deemed efficient enough and that was mass produced and the inventor that was sent around the world to oversee its installation was invented by an African American named Lewis Latimer. But the white society has created a narrative because Thomas Edison went and patented his light bulb first. Thank God for Thomas Edison, we have the light, we have light. It's a lie. They distort facts to exalt themselves and to marginalize black people as a means of maintaining their social dominance. And then they marginalize Lewis Latimer. I would say he merely advanced the light bulb. But the truth is, he was working on a separate one, his own. The narratives that are fed into our society are distorted to exalt the white society. White social scientists describe this an ethical practice as instilling a value system into the collective minds of the subordinate populations that makes them adhere to the authority and the existing infrastructure of the dominant society. To say this more simply, it instills a value system into our minds that makes us more compliant with white dominance over our lives. Now, the reason why we're not hearing about this because we no longer have true black leaders. We have these black puppets, and they actually work for the white establishment, and the government gives fundings to the many of these 501c3 nonprofit organizations that are here to liberate black people, as they say. And if their narratives, if what they're focused on is against the interests of the white establishment, the white establishment pulls away those fundings, those federal grants. So this allows the white society to control what our so-called leaders addresses, talk about. So we're able to sit there and protest the narrative about the cops killing black people, and they completely ignore it anyway. But we are completely ignoring the fact of the social engineering that's being done to our minds as a means of maintaining white dominance. Are you aware that after slavery was abolished, in the 80 years following slavery, African Americans submitted 724 patents to the U.S. Patent Application Office, and this number more than doubled those by Caucasians. But see, these are not the narratives that you're functioning based upon. You are functioning based upon the false narratives that are designed to keep our collective self-esteem low, and they're designed to keep our collective aggression shifted against ourselves, that are designed to make us feel subordinate to the white society as a means of maintaining white dominance. Our ignorance of the war that's being deployed against us is the white society's greatest weapon against us. There are social sciences that are required for maintaining long-term dominance. And there are social science that's required for the long-term oppression of the people. It is not until black people learn these social sciences, I say again, it's not until black people elevate our minds above a biblical fairy tale and a slave syndrome myth, and learn instead of the true social sciences that are being deployed against us. We have to understand this. For example, many of us say, why is it that we're learning more racially affirming facts from each other on social media than we do so within our schools? You know why? It's because that's a social science. In order for a dominant group to maintain their position of social dominance, they must condition the minds of the subordinate population to accept their subordinate status within the society. How is this achieved? This is achieved by denying the subordinate population of a racially affirming curriculum. When the subordinate population is denied a racially affirming curriculum, this subconsciously conditions them to accept their own subordinate status within the society dominated by their oppressors. Everything the white society does is a social science, and our ignorance of it is their greatest power. Okay, another example. Why is it that Africa is always so negatively distorted in the Western world? because doing so also benefits the system of white supremacy. By constantly denigrating the image of Africa, this instills within the minds of the Africans throughout the diaspora that slavery benefited us. Because slavery, it causes us to perceive slavery as more of a rescue mission. So we feel grateful for the enslavement of our ancestors because it removed us from the backwoodsness of Africa. And it also prevents us from seeking the reparations we're still owed, because deep down inside we feel that we're happy slavery happened because it benefited us. It is always by deliberate design when the oppressed starts thinking exactly as the oppressors wants them to. The practice is known as socialize. Socialize is when the dominant society exploits their monopoly over information that are fed into the minds of subordinate population to condition them to think and behave in ways that are beneficial to the dominant society. Our ignorance of this fact is their greatest power. Black people, we have to stop believing in things that insults our own intelligence. The belief that a Bible that was written, in fact, that was written by immoral Romans that routinely engaged in massive orgies, bestiality, wife swapping, sodomy, pedophilia, and death sports, written by these people. And they continued these practices long after writing the Bible. And then the Bible was then brutally beaten into the minds of our ancestors by their enslavers and colonizers that also raped, maimed, and tortured and murdered them. To believe that this is how the true words of God would be introduced to a people is ridiculous. Also, the fact that the Bible strongly condones slavery also totally disqualifies the Bible from being the true words of God. We have to start thinking based upon facts. Are you also aware that the Emperor Constantine, who oversaw the writing of the Bible, he was in fact the man in charge of the Bible, he himself never converted to a Christian? Even on his deathbed, he refused. The man who added Jesus to the Bible refused to convert into a Christian. Would you eat a meal prepared by a chef who refused to eat his own cooking? No. We are not functioning based upon intelligence. We're following traditions. And the traditions keeps us mentally enslaved. The belief that we are being controlled by a slave syndrome is ridiculous. Because that's not how you control a people. The slave syndrome presents what would be the least effective method used for controlling a people. True brainwashing requires a system that's being constantly reapplied upon the minds of a people. If not, it will weaken with each new generation and not worsen, as we've seen. Our condition today is worse than it was during the 1960s. In the 60s, we called ourselves brothers and sisters, as I said before. We wore afros. Now, today, we call ourselves niggas and bitches and wearing long weaves. In the 60s, we said black is beautiful. Today, we're bleaching our skins. If our condition was connected to slavery, our condition would have been worse during the 1960s and be lesser today. Because this generation is further removed from slavery. The fact that our condition is worse today than it was during slavery totally disqualifies the premise that our condition is connected to slavery. Our condition is the result of an ideological subversion program. The white society uses social engineering tactics that's used for maintaining their white dominance. Although all white societies profess equality for all citizens, they are unrelentingly committed towards the preservation of their nation's white dominance. There's also an immense fear of black retribution that exists amongst those white societies that has been brutally oppressive Africans for nearly 500 years. This combined commitment to maintaining white dominance and this immense fear of massive unified black retribution resulted in the white society deploying psychological warfare against black people. And the blatant racism that demonstrated in the 60s that became no longer effective and no longer such acceptable to changing time resulted in them having to develop covert methods for maintaining their white dominance. We are now functioning under these covert methods. My people, it's time to liberate our minds. It's time to elevate our thinking. It's time to learn the truth of our plighted condition. Usually people have a right to believe whatever they want to believe, but there's an exception when it comes to the oppressed. We must gain a true and accurate understanding of our plight and condition, because if our understandings are flawed, then all remedies that stem from it will be flawed. We have to elevate our minds and learn of the true social sciences that are being deployed for maintaining white dominance. I thank you for taking a few of your minutes to listen to me. Please elevate our minds. Let's learn of the social sciences, and then let's develop counter strategies against those social sciences. Please share this video, because we must elevate our minds. We must lift our people away from our ignorance. One love and peace, my brothers and sisters. One love and peace.